This is Running with the Pack, episode 9. I'm Paul Bishop, Wolfpack Publishing's acquisitions editor, and with me today is my buddy LJ Martin. How you doing, pal?
If I got any better, you couldn't stand me. Doing great. It's really good to see you again, Paul. I wish we were face to face and been at an elbow somewhere.
Yeah, that would be really nice, but these times are a little strange, and unfortunately, we don't get to do that. So this is the next best thing.
I think strange is a great understatement.
So let's start with what you're working on now. You're always got a book going in your computer. What's driving you today?
I always have at least one going. Right now, I'm writing a sequel to O'Rourke's Revenge, which is my Arizona series. I'm going to follow that up with a sequel to 2,000 Grueling Miles, my young adult series that Mike did so well with. Then I hope I'll do another thriller. He packaged my thrillers up and got them to the top 45 of all books in the U.S. and the U.K., which I thought was an amazing feat. All Wolfpack Publishings, he's so very, very good with that SEO and that internet marketing and getting the word out.
So you actually made a very good choice all those years ago when you had this idea for Wolfpack Publishing in your head, and you went to your buddy Mike Bray and said, "Hey, I've got this idea for a publishing company," and I think he said something along the lines of, "You're out of your mind."
He did. He had never sold a book before, and had no idea how screwed up the business was, and I didn't tell him how screwed up the business was. He actually called me, and it said I had a blog going, and he said, "I can help you with that blog." And I said, "Well, I've never been very vain in that standpoint." I said I could always use help, and suddenly my readership went way up with him working on it. And I said, "Hey, by the way, I got these books. Could you help me sell these books? I'll tell you what I'm going to do." Even in the real estate business before, I've always said, buck for you, buck for me. I went 50-50 with people. And I said, "You sell some books and I'll split it with you." And suddenly I was making 25, 30 times what I'd been making trying to sell them myself. And then we stumbled into Western Writers of America convention, and an old friend of mine, a guy who I had great respect for, Chet Cunningham, who had 300 or so in his backlist, walked up, and I said, "Chet, what are you up to?" And he said, "Well, I'm still writing, but I'm not making a dime. Haven't made a dime in 10 years.
Wow.
And I said, "Oh my God." I said, let me help you. I'll tell you what, let me try to sell some of your backlist and we'll split with you." And suddenly that really was the birth of Wolfpack. And one of my happiest moments in all of my many careers was signing a check for $11,000 to Chet Cunningham for 1 month's work when he hadn't been making anything.
That's fantastic. And I have to tell you, the thing that made me join Wolfpack was, I was talking back and forth with Mike Bray a couple of times, and he finally said to me, he said, "Paul, what you don't understand is that despite our name Wolfpack Publishing, we're not a publishing company." And I went, "Okay, then what are you?" And he went, "We're a marketing company." And I went, "Oh," the light went on over over my head, and I went, "This is the words I've been waiting my entire writing career for somebody to say to me."
Well, every self-publisher you ever come across writes a good book, gets a good cover, does everything, and has no idea how to sell it. Mike knew how to sell on the internet, and that was the magic ingredient.
Absolutely, because Mike sells ice to Eskimos since he was about 4 years old.
Yeah.
And so
he and I were friends in the real estate business a long time before that.
Yeah, so adding that into the mix has really made a difference. But it's not only that. I think what you also touch on is Wolfpack is incredibly author friendly, right? We want our authors to succeed. We're friends with our authors.
I wrote that first contract, and I tell you, I wrote it in favor of authors. I mean, I wrote it as what the contract I would like to have had as a writer for Bantam and Avon and Gale and on and on, you know, and never got anything near that. So
Yeah, it's a wonderful experience. It's quite frankly a happy family, and Mike's very responsive, as are, I mean, we're those of us that are actually working in the company. There's not a lot of us, but everybody is responsive and is always on the best lookout for the right solution for everybody. And that's kind of an unusual situation.
unusual in that here are a couple of guys working out of their home offices. We're putting out as many books as some of those guys in those 20-story buildings in New York.
Absolutely.
That always tickled me and made me smile.
So when did we know Mike started selling Eskimos ice when he was 4, as we said. How about you? When did you start putting words on paper?
Like I wrote 7 chapters when I was about 25 of a thriller and realized I didn't know caca and put it aside. Besides, I was raising 4 boys and in the real estate business, and didn't get a check at the end of the month unless it came out of the title company. It was something I did. So I went back to work. Then I got a divorce later on, went down and lived on a boat for a year. I made a chunk of money and went down and lived on a boat in Dana Point. And I was in a perfect spot. I was reading Richard Henry Dana's 2 Years Before the Mast, and the mission was right there. Dana Point was right there. I'm on a sailboat. So I started writing a historical. Well, I thought I was going to be able to chase girls, and I wasn't very successful at that, even though I had a nice big boat. And I started writing, and I really attribute my continuing writing to my kids, because they were I don't know, 12 and 14 and on the boat at the time with me for a while. Every time a page came out of the printer and I stopped, they read it and said, "What's next, Dad?" I ended up writing a 400 or 500 page historical, and which didn't sell for a long time. Then after Kat and I got married, and the honeymoon wore off, I was writing again, and kept me out of the saloons. And she looked over my shoulder and said, "I can do better than that, I think," and did. And but that we sold our first 2 novels within 6 weeks of each other.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow. And Kat Martin, of course, has gone on to become a best-selling writer of romantic thrillers, and you've gone on to be a best-selling writer of westerns and men's adventure and historicals, and you are in many different genres. How does that work for you? How do you go from genre to genre like that?
Well, other than time and place, I really think they're all basically the same. I mean, you got to write a compelling book. You got to write a book that makes them continue to turn the pages, and you got to put proper facts. I use this simile all the time, and people don't like it very much, but there was a guy who was very, 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 very successful in what he did by the name of Adolf Hitler. And he said, "Tell them 3 truths and they'll believe your lie." So, and your lie being the fiction aspect of your book. So you put good history in there, and you put compelling chapter endings and things that Louis L'Amour taught me, and lots of other great writers. And it doesn't matter what genre you're in. I mean, I've made a lot of mistakes, and I wasn't in the military, although I was surrounded by kids, and my husband-in-law, my first was the captain of my Navy. My brother was a FAU pilot off the Ranger, but I used the term clip one time instead of magazine. Man, they came all over me, right? And I put one time there's an expert on everything in the West. I get I got a cigar in a book in 1873, and I get a letter from a guy who says that cigar was not introduced in the West until 1877. I mean,
You know, you can't please everybody, and some people you just can't please at all, no matter what.
the good news was I loved the book, except.
That's funny. Now, there are times when I will come across an idea and it's not right for me. It's a great idea, and I think about it and I go, no, that's a book for somebody else to write. Do you ever come up against that?
Yeah, I get offered. I got offered by the guy who killed Benny Binion, or the court released him out of jail, said they didn't have enough evidence to write his story, right? Big, good-looking guy, but working with a killer or even a accused killer for 6 months on his book was not my bag. And of course, every cocktail party, somebody says, you ought to write about my divorce.
Yeah.
Or some,
yeah. So, my life would make a great book. You know, I had an interesting life. Yeah, interesting to you, but not to anybody else.
You know, I always say, you know, for 99 cents or $2.99 or whatever it sells for, you can go online and buy my Write Compelling Fiction. Boy, you ought to write it yourself. You'd be so happy with yourself when you finish.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting how many people, as you say, will say to you, you know, I'm going to write a book when I have time.
Yep.
And, you know, how about, I have a great idea. Why don't you write it and we'll split the profits? Wait a minute. That's not the way it works, right? Because ideas are everywhere.
I always tell them 2 pages a day, partner, and in six months, you got a book.
Yeah. So what was your first Western?
First Western was originally called Tin Killer. I've changed it to Buckshot. It's been republished as Buckshot. It went out of my house and went to Kensington, which was Zebra at the time. And I got a call and about 6 weeks after I submitted it. And that was in the days when they had a 20 by 30 foot room full of manuscripts. And that was their slush pile. And an editor had walked in there and just grabbed it off the shelf, sat down, and he called me and he said, I couldn't put it down.
Wow.
That best words you'll ever hear about any of your books, as you well know. And I got the grand sum total of $1,500 advance, and I was thrilled. My wife got a $4,000 advance, by the way, on her first book, but she's a lot prettier than I am.
A lot.
Yeah. So, you know, that was the start of it. And I got a contract with Zebra and wrote 2 books for them. And then I was in a Western Writers of America convention, which I'd conned them into letting me join at the time, when you had to have 2 published books at that time in order to join. And I saw Greg Tobin, who was the editor of Bantam, and Bantam published Louis L'Amour, and everybody in the Western genre wanted to be published by Bantam. So I spent 15 minutes at one of those pitch sessions with him, and then the not Bonfire of the Vanities, but the one about the moth, was out by Thomas Harris, and I couldn't put that book down. I was in my room reading it, but I looked down and saw him cross the patio, and I grabbed one of my books and I ran down. He had his suitcase, by the way. I knew he was leaving. I ran down to the desk and I said, "Oh, Greg, thanks for Greg Tobin was the guy, a great editor." I said, "Thanks for the 15 minutes." And I slipped that book in his coat pocket and I said, "Here, this will give you something to read on the plane." You know, audacious. Okay.
Oh, good man.
Comes from being a salesman. 6 months later, he called me back and said, "I couldn't get that book out of my mind. Would you like to write for Bantam?" You know, that's like saying, would you like to win the lottery to a guy who's writing Westerns?
Now, when you read for pleasure, what do you read?
Everything. Right now.
Okay. Alexander Hamilton.
prodigious task.
Absolutely.
And I just read Polk, the book about Polk, and I didn't have much respect for Polk until I read that book. And one of the reasons I didn't have, because I had written the book about set around the early life of Edward Fitzgerald Beale, who I think is the most exciting guy to ever come out of the West. Rush to Destiny is the title of that book. But and he was busily working under Polk, and one of the things he did was when he bought a 7-pound nugget with his own money, and talked Stockton into letting him carry that nugget back to Congress to show them that this gold rush thing was real, and he flopped it down on Polk's desk, and he says, "Hey, this gold rush is going to be a big thing in California." And Polk put in his diary that evening, "Nothing of consequence happened today." So, that was the biggest migration in the history of mankind at the time. Was nothing of consequence, right? Shows you how wrong we can all be.
Absolutely.
But, yeah.
Now, tell me a couple of books that you read growing up that have stayed with you all your life.
Oh, the Sacketts. Little later than I was growing up, I read Steinbeck early. East of Eden stuck with me. Being a poor kid raised in county housing, I kind of identified with that book. Harold Robbins books a little later on, which I'm thrilled to see that Mike is republishing a number of those. McLean's, the Ice Station Zebra and some of those.
Alistair McLean, yeah.
I could go on and on. I mean, even some Mary Higgins Clark's books, Danielle Steele's The Ring. I mean, I just hundreds of them.
I agree. And there are books that when I read them, they make me want to be a better writer because of the way those books make me feel. And so, I don't think you, as a writer, you really can't copy somebody else, their style, because you have to develop your own voice, but you can strive to have the same kind of impact.
Right now, I'm in the same town with James Lee Burke. Okay. Every time I read James Lee Burke, I throw it down and say, "You son of a bitch." He is so good and such a master of words. Now, I don't think, and I hope he's not watching, but I don't think he's the best plotter. I don't think he's the best, a lot of things that get different, but nobody does words like James Lee Burke does. The guy is so good. And I've heard him talk a couple of times, and he's as good in person as he is on the page.
How does your writing program work? Do you just write a first draft all the way through? Do you go back and edit the work you've done the day before? What's your process?
3 or 4 pages I read when I sit back, keep going. I probably 5 or 10 times during the writing, I print the book and I read. And I don't start at the beginning, I come back, I start 2 or 3 or 4 chapters ahead, read, correct on the page. They read on the page different than they read on the computer, as you well know, and make corrections, make sure that my hero, who had blue eyes in the beginning, doesn't have brown eyes now. Or as Kat pointed out to me one time in writing a thriller, she said, "You killed this guy in the last book. Probably not a good idea that you continue with him." As a matter of fact, the series we just came out with, when Mike put all of my thrillers together, we got one out of order, and I got a letter. You killed those 2 guys. The only reason it happened is because the book was one book out of order. So
when they put out the box sets.
Everything we do in this business. Speaking of this business, I mean, it's made such incredible changes over the 35 years now almost that I've been at, or more than 35, because I've had my 35 wedding anniversary, and and started right before we were married. When we were living in San, I started. So
It's been an interesting process to see how publishing has changed. Obviously, the indie market and Amazon changed everything, just like MP3s did in music,
no
right?
question.
Because it gave independent bands a way to reach their audience, and they didn't have to go through the gatekeepers.
Good simile, I tell you.
And then, even though independent publishing has changed, because an author by himself really doesn't have a lot of a chance to reach an audience, even with all the things that are tried. And so you had, some boutique publishers that popped up, but then Wolfpack is really the uh, example for the future here, and they're really the ones that are making it work.
When we started with print on demand, just so that writer had something to hand to grandma, right? But the fact was, Bantam had 253 salesmen in the field going to bookstores. Now, how's a guy sitting in Clinton, Montana, going to compete with that unless he publishes through them and waits and gets a lousy
Advance.
a lousy advance, and waits a minimum of 6 months and usually at least a year for his money? Those are the things that we changed, that made radical changes in the business. And the reason that Wolfpack went from 0 until I sold by far the majority out to Mike, or we kept a little override, but went from 0 to 400 books, 450 books in 3 years. And then, God, what is he now? 2,000 books or something at least.
Yeah.
I mean, how could you have ever done that without the internet?
Yeah, it's been amazing. Well, Larry, I appreciate you taking time with me today. Thank you very much. And hopefully you and I will see each other again in person soon.
And bend an elbow. Look forward to it, partner.
You bet.